Yo, YouTube, what's up with your boy? Sports and Fitness Rants. I'm back, guys. Click that like button. Subscribe to my channel. What's up, y'all? Welcome back, guys. Welcome back. Man, got another great video for you guys today. As usual, man, you guys know the deal on this channel. It's all about setting the record straight, stopping the lies and stopping the narratives, guys. Stopping them from rewriting history, guys, holding a standard. And in this video, we're going to set the record straight on Stephen A. Smith, and we are going to educate Stephen A. Smith. And once again, I wonder and I question how someone like Stephen A. Smith and others have the platforms they have for as long as they have them because they went to school and got a degree. I'm just confused how these guys become these, celebrity, reporters. And I'm just, like I said, I just don't understand, man. So anyway, if you guys don't know, Stephen A. Smith, I'm assuming is today. I think this was today. I don't know if it was on Get Up this morning or whatever it was, or if it was ESPN First Take. I don't know what it was. But I saw this video today of Stephen A. Smith giving his top 5 point guards of all time. And Stephen A. Smith, once again, fails to educate the fans out here. ESPN, someone like Stephen A. Smith, the burden is on him. Dude, you've been on ESPN, what, 20, 30 years? I don't even know how long he's been part of ESPN. This dude is supposed to be someone that people are supposed to look to for their knowledge, their basketball knowledge. He's supposed to be giving context, perspective, like I said, on the history of basketball. Educate the people out there. But he doesn't do that. He gives a top 5 point guards of all time list and has Chris Paul number 5. And we're going to talk about this video, man. Once again, you guys know the deal, man. I want to thank you guys, everyone across the world, everyone across the states has been supporting my channel. Once again, guys, I am truly, truly humbled, man, by all support. It really means a lot, guys. Much respect, and shout out to everybody in the membership, man. And you guys know what to do. Turn the volume all the way up. Hit that play button. Remember, these videos are for educational purposes. And let's roll. So, yes, guys, like I said, man, I wanted to do a video on some comments I heard Stephen A. Smith make. Excuse me for that, guys. That I heard Stephen A. Smith make in a video, in a clip. Like I said, I don't know if it was from Get Up or First Take today, but he gave his top 5 point guards of all time. Or, so I thought he gave the top 5 point guards of all time. Now, I think I saw 2 Raw just dropped a video on this. I thought I was going to be the first person to touch on this, but damn it, 2 Raw, you beat me to it, man. And I think I saw him do a video. I didn't watch the video, but I thought I saw him do a video on this topic. I could be wrong, but I thought I did. So I don't think anyone else has. But in this clip, Stephen A. Smith, right, it's labeled as a top 5 point guards of all time. But as Stephen A. Smith is doing this list, he starts to say what? It's the top 5 point guards that he saw with his own eyes, that he watched play. Which doesn't make any sense, because how can it be the top 5 point guards of all time if you're trying to say before they even start doing the list that this is the top 5 point guards of the players that you watch with your eyes, that you saw live? So he says in the beginning, no disrespect to Oscar Robertson, because we know how great Oscar Robertson is, but I'm doing the top 5 point guards of the guys that I watch play. That doesn't make any, that's not all time then, Stephen A. Smith. You see what I'm saying, guys? These people don't make any sense. Stephen A. Smith is supposed to be a professional, right? But yet you label the list the top 5 point guards of all time, but then you qualify it by saying, oh, no, listen, no disrespect to Oscar Robertson, but this is the top 5 point guards of the guys that I watched. So right off the jump, it's not top 5 point guards of all time there, Stephen A. Smith. So you're a clown right now for saying that. By labeling it top 5 all time, but then trying to say there's the top 5 point guards of the guys that you watched doesn't make any sense. So I think Stephen A. Smith was born in like 1967 or 1968. So he grew up in the 70s and the 80s, the 90s, right? He grew up watching that stuff. But I don't know, like, what he remembers from basketball, like what age he remembers watching basketball, when he started watching basketball. Some people start watching sports late in their life. Some people get into it early. I don't know. It's not really important. But that gave me an idea of the guys that he watched, or guys that maybe he didn't watch that were not on that list, because I was confused as hell. And I'm pretty sure 2 Raw was confused also, because he has Chris Paul number 5. So let's go through the list, guys, and then I'll break it down. Now, the list to me is not a bad list. It just doesn't make any sense, because you say that it's the top 5 point guards of all time. Then, like I said, you qualify it by saying, after he had Chris Paul number 5, and not Oscar Robertson on this list, he had to qualify him by saying, oh, the top 5 point guards are the guys that I watched. So The only guy that I have a problem with on this list is Chris Paul. I do not believe Chris Paul is a top 5 point guard since he's been watching basketball. So let's call it since 1980. Can we call it since 1980 or since 1975? I don't know, Stephen A. Smith, when you started watching basketball, that you remember that you would talk or put a guy on a list. But let's call it 1980 just to give it a nice even round number, the 80s. So since the 80s, essentially, is what Stephen A. Smith is basically saying, I'm guessing here. From the list, that's what it looks like. So he has Chris Paul, number 5. He's got Jason Kidd, number 4. Isaiah Thomas, number 3. Steph Curry, number 2. And Magic Johnson, obviously, number 1. Now, 1 through 4, got no problem with this list. Once again, if we're talking about the top 5 point guards since Stephen A. Smith's been watching, let's call it 1980. All right? Got no problem with Jason Kidd being top 5. I told you, to me, Jason Kidd is arguably top 5 regardless. For me, he's arguably top 5. Jason Kidd, with his overall skill set, the impact, his leadership, the hustle, the heart, the grit. To me, Jason Kidd, arguably a top 5, but to me, he's definitely a top 10 point guard in NBA's history. So Stephen A. Smith at Jason Kidd, number 4, no problem with that. Right? I have no problem with Isaiah Thomas being top 5, number 3, whatever. No problem with Isaiah Thomas being a top 5 point guard, either of all time or just in the time that Stephen A. Smith has been watching, since 1980, let's call it. Right? And obviously, I don't have a problem with Steph Curry being number 2 or Magic Johnson being number 1. I have a problem with Steph Curry being on the list because of Stephen A. Smith and some of the things that he said. So he had Chris Paul, number 5. Have no clue how he ended up there. I do not believe, since 1980, I'm going with, that Chris Paul's a top 5 point guard since 1980. Because there's a lot of names, guys, that we can think about that I would put above Chris Paul, guys. Now, once again, I'm not a Chris Paul guy. I do not think Chris Paul is that great. I think he's completely overstated. Not going to say he's overrated, but I think he's completely overstated, overblown, overhyped. To me, Chris Paul's best years were in New Orleans. To me, that was when he was at his best. I think he was in New Orleans, 4 seasons maybe? 5 seasons, I don't know, whatever it was. To me, that was Chris Paul at his best. CP3 in New Orleans, dude was sensational, man. First couple years in LA Clippers, pretty good still. But to me, Chris Paul, after like 7, 8 years, he went downhill for me. And he's been mediocre for the last 10 seasons. Now, this year, Chris Paul played all 82 games at an advanced age. Great for Chris Paul, man. Once again, no impact on a crap Spurs team. But Chris Paul's been bouncing around, right? Went to the Clippers, then went to the Houston Rockets, went to the OKC Thunder, right? I mean, went to the Phoenix Suns. Now he's in the spot. I mean, the dude's been all over the place. So Chris Paul's been on a nosedive ever since pretty much like I said, the second, third year on the LA Clippers. But to me, how the hell do you have Chris Paul in number 5? Like I said, even since 1980, there's no way that you can argue, to me, Chris Paul is a top 5 point guard. Because who's not on this list? Who's not on the list, guys? Let's think about this now. Like I said, I got no problem with 1 through 4. But like I said, if you're going to have Steph Curry, number 2, it doesn't make any sense for what Stephen A. Smith was saying. Because like I said, he hyped up Chris Paul for being number 5 based off of his pure point guard skills. Right? He talked about Chris Paul being a pass-first player, a traditional pure point guard, and all the things that he could do, a floor general. That's not Steph Curry. Steph Curry's not a traditional point guard. He's not a floor general in that regard. He's not an assist creator like that in that regard. He talked about Chris Paul and how many assists he was able to accumulate in his career, all this stuff. And he said that as a reason, right, to highlight why he put him over Gary Payton. This is what Stephen A. Smith said. So this is what I'm talking about. Stephen A. Smith blew an opportunity to educate the people out there. First of all, he blew it by leaving the list since he watched. Then don't name it all time then. Say since 1980. Or say, since I've been following the game, since I was watching the game, these are my top 5 point guards. Say that. My top 5 point guards. Don't say the top 5 point guards in NBA's history of all time. You guys can't say that. But that's what these clowns do. They give you an emotional, they tell you who they like. It's like, these are my favorite point guards of all time, but they disguise it as a top 5 point guards of all time. These are just the guys that you like more. Just say it that way. That's how a lot of these people do these lists. There's no, like, they can't be objective. They can't be. So they have to have these weird lists that sound like they're being biased because they are. Stephen A. Smith, you put Chris Paul above Gary Payton? Above Gary Payton. I'm not taking Chris Paul for Gary Payton. I'm never doing that. Once again, if we're going, see, Chris Paul's known for his passing, being a pure point guard, and his defense, right? To me, Gary Payton was a greater defender, more consistent. His longevity on defense, to me, was greater. Played in a tougher era. I'm going with Gary Payton. Chris Paul defensively. As far as passing the ball, playmaking skills, yeah, Chris Paul, we can argue and make a case better passing than Gary Payton. No doubt about it. But Gary Payton was an excellent playmaker at that point guard position. The heart, the grit, the durability, the toughness of Gary Payton, I'm going with over CP3. CP3 is always injured, always hurt when it matters most. When it matters most, that's when he's always hurt. You ever notice that? Always goes down in the most critical moments. This is Chris Paul, man. Like I said, he's played with all kinds of talent, Chris Paul. And to me, he's underachieved because he's not durable. He's not there when it matters most. He's not that dude. Just not. So I'm going with Gary Payton. So Stephen A. Smith makes the argument why he took Chris Paul over Gary Payton because of his pure point guard skills, the passing ability of Chris Paul over Gary Payton. But you have Steph Curry number 2. That doesn't make any sense then because Steph Curry's not a pure point guard. He's not a floor general. He's not a pass-first guy. That's not him. So why would Steph Curry be number 2 on this list then to you if you're using that for Chris Paul but not for Steph Curry? Doesn't make any sense. Yeah, Isaiah Thomas number 3. Like I said, I have no problem with that. The skills of Isaiah Thomas, excuse me. Even though I don't respect Isaiah Thomas, the person, the analyst, you know, who he's become, I respect the basketball player Isaiah Thomas. I respect his skills on the court. I'm not stupid. Okay, so also, I didn't hear John Stockton's name once from Stephen A. Smith. So Stephen A. Smith, you didn't watch John Stockton play? You don't remember John Stockton? See, man, again, they disrespect John Stockton. That's disrespect to John Stockton to me. That you don't even mention him, put him in the top 5 of guys that you watched. Chris Paul's greater than John Stockton now? I don't know when that happened. I don't know when it happened. Was Chris Paul a better scorer than John Stockton? Yes, I would say that Chris Paul was a better scorer than John Stockton, but I would also say that Chris Paul was more aggressive scoring than John Stockton was. Was Chris Paul a better shooter than John Stockton? I don't believe so. Was Chris Paul a better ball handler? I think we could say that they're pretty close. To me, John Stockton was more durable, obviously. He was a better leader. To me, John Stockton, like I said, made the people around him better than Chris Paul did. To me, John Stockton was more precise than Chris Paul was. So I've always told you, to me, John Stockton's greatest strength passing the ball wasn't the flash. He wasn't the flashiest passer. There were many guys that were flashier than John Stockton. But John Stockton had the precision that a lot of these guys did not have. The precision. So more often than not, most of the times, John Stockton's passes are on the money. No careless turnovers, not every times making bad passes, stupid careless turnovers. That's not John Stockton, man. And like I said, he was always there. And he hustled on defense, right? He gave effort on defense. Like I said, and played in a very difficult era to make all defensive teams. When you're playing the guard position in an era with guys like Gary Payton, Michael Jordan. These guys are hogging all the defensive spots for the guard position, man. All right? So we have to understand that off the jump, guys. But he didn't mention John Stockton. I'm picking John Stockton over Chris Paul. I'm not taking Chris Paul over John Stockton. So, if all things are even, all the teammates are even, right? Everything equal, and you have John Stockton running a team, Chris Paul running a team, I'm going to take John Stockton's team in a 7-game series. Chris Paul's not going to make it 7 games, number 1. He'd get hurt probably in game number 3 or game number 4. He'll go down. John Stockton won't. He'll be there. I know that. That's number 1. Number 2, like I said, to me, John Stockton's going to maximize his teammates. He's going to be a better leader. He's going to have them more prepared than a Chris Paul team. We saw Chris Paul in the NBA Finals, and what happened to his team? His team was up 2 games and nothing and lost 4 in a row. That didn't happen to John Stockton, all right? And John Stockton, like I said, wasn't going against Giannis Milwaukee Bucks. He was going against Michael Jordan's Dynasty Bulls, all right, in the final. That's who John Stockton was dealing with, all right? So, to me, give me John Stockton over Chris Paul. So how is Chris Paul number 5? Gary Payton, John Stockton. So that's already knocks him down to 7th on the list of guys that he saw play. He definitely saw Gary Payton. He definitely saw John Stockton. Let's think about some other guys here. Let's think about maybe Steve Nash. How about Steve Nash? Is Steve Nash better than Chris Paul? I think that's a discussion. I'll probably take Steve Nash over Chris Paul. Once again, Steve Nash, the overall skills of Steve Nash. Now, defensively, absolutely. Chris Paul got him defensively, definitely, no doubt. Steve Nash, one of the weaker defenders at the point guard position. When you're talking about guys like Gary Payton, you're talking about guys like Chris Paul, you're talking about some of these players, John Stockton's, right? We all know Nash is on the lower end of the spectrum on defense. But Steve Nash had elite handles, elite shot making, Passing was elite. The leadership of Steve Nash, to me, was not maybe elite, but he was a very good leader. And Steve Nash was tough. He was tough, Steve Nash, right? Didn't have the injury problems as much as a Chris Paul, like I said, when it mattered most. And Steve Nash competed in a much tougher era of the 2000s Western Conference. Not saying that Chris Paul played in a weak conference, per se. He played in the West basically his entire career. But it wasn't the 2000s West. He came in, I believe his first season was 08, I want to say, for Chris Paul. Maybe 07, maybe something like that. Somewhere around there, I want to say. So he didn't go to the 2000s West like that. Steve Nash was dealing with the Dallas Mavericks. He was dealing with the San Antonio Spurs dynasty. He was dealing with the Lakers dynasty. He was dealing with those early Sacramento Kings in the early 2000s. Right? You just the Utah Jazz teams of the 2000s. That John Stockton with Karl Malone still there in the early 2000s, man. So, you know, this is the level of competition that Steve Nash was going against, man. But Steve Nash wasn't mentioned here in the top 5. I would probably take Nash over CP3. How about Tony Parker? Now, I'm not saying definitively that Tony Parker is greater or better than Chris Paul, but you didn't even mention Tony Parker. Tony Parker, who gets lost in the shuffle of those point guards at that time, because you had guys like Allen Iverson, who's not really a point guard per se, you know, but he kind of played that kind of point guard, shooting guard kind of role. But you had the Jason Kidds, the Steve Nashes, you know, you had the Chris Pauls, the Gary Paytons still in the league, the John Stocktons in the early 2000s. So someone like Tony Parker kind of gets lost in the shuffle with these great point guards. But Tony Parker, that's a debate. Tony Parker versus CP3. And I know there's probably a lot of people that would probably take Tony Parker over Chris Paul. Once again, defensively, Chris Paul got it over Tony Parker, absolutely. As far as just shooting, Chris Paul is a better shooter than Tony Parker. But when we talk about attacking the rim, give me Tony Parker attacking the rim. Tony Parker's floater in the lane, second to none. It's on the level of the Mark Jackson floater, the Rod Strickland floater that I've seen over the years. Tony Parker's floater, like I said, second to none. His layup package, his layup game, insane, Tony Parker. And a lot of people don't talk about Tony Parker, but his ability, and I mean, if you remember Tony Parker from the 2000s, guys, there were seasons where Tony Parker was like top 3 in points in the paint. Points in the paint, guys, because Tony Parker lived in the paint. You couldn't keep that man out the paint. No matter what you did, Tony Parker was very, very quick, man. He had that quickness. He had that spin move. Tony Parker, like I said, the offensive ability is him to get to that paint. Chris Paul don't got it like that. So, like I said, I'm not saying defending Tony Parker over Chris Paul all time. But you didn't even mention Tony Parker. So that's what I'm saying. You blew an opportunity to educate the people. Bring up Tony Parker. Let the people know about Tony Parker. You didn't even mention John Stockton. It's just really sad for Stephen A. Smith to consider himself an expert. That's basically what he's considered, an expert on basketball. Dude dropped the ball again. So like I said, he labels it as the top 5 point guards of all time, but then you say that it's the top 5 guys that you watched. Doesn't make any sense. Because I was wondering where Oscar Robertson was. I'm wondering where's Walt Clyde Frazier. No Walt Clyde Frazier mentioned. Right? You didn't throw Bob Cousy's name out there, so you're not educating anyone. But how about someone like, I told you, he mentioned Oscar Robertson, but basically just to say, I didn't watch Oscar Robertson play, so I'm not putting him on this list. That's the dumbest thing ever. I'm so tired of people saying, I didn't watch this guy play, so I'm not putting him on my list. Then your list is not an all-time list. It's of who you like, who you watched, not an all-time list then. All right? Bob Cousy wasn't mentioned on this list, like I said. So, once again, doesn't make any sense. But how about Anthony Penny Hardaway? Stephen A. Smith is in Anthony Hardaway. I'm not saying Anthony Hardaway is greater than Chris Paul. Anthony Hardaway, we all know, had the injury issues. But if we just take Anthony Hardaway for those several seasons there, that dude was sensational. That dude is going to be definitely better than Chris Paul, from what I saw. But Stephen A. Smith, anyway. What about Derrick Rose? Another guy, Derrick Rose, I'm sure Stephen A. Smith saw play basketball. Once again, not saying that Chris Paul's above, Derrick Rose above Chris Paul all time. But does anyone think that if Derrick Rose didn't have the injury that he had, that Derrick Rose would not have a greater career than Chris Paul? Especially the fact that Chris Paul never won a championship. The way that they lost in the 2021 finals is embarrassing. You were up 2-0 and lost 4 in a row. I mean, they're just horrible, man. And like I said, how many times did Chris Paul fold up in a playoff scenario, get hurt in a playoff scenario, right? Just go down, not have leadership, not have the durability to win, to lead, to do anything. Many times. So we could talk about Derrick Rose and what he would have been able to do, right? His skill set, how great he would have been, but Stephen A. Smith doesn't. How about Russell Westbrook? Now, once again, not defending saying that I would put Russell Westbrook. No, I actually would take Russell Westbrook over Chris Paul all time. I'm ranking Russell Westbrook over Chris Paul all time. That's just me. I'm not saying that Russell Westbrook is a better pure point guard than Chris Paul, because he's not. But to me, give me Russell Westbrook over Chris Paul, man, and what he's been able to accomplish in his career. Even though to me, like I said, Russell Westbrook and his lack of all defensive teams, never made an all defensive team, that to me is a big problem. I have Russell Westbrook. Dude, you never took that challenge. You never made one. With the body that he has, the athleticism of him, this dude should have made several all-defensive teams. He should have been a guy, a terror on that side of the ball at that point guard position. He should have been a hound out there, but it just never was. But give me Russell Westbrook, man. But like I said, didn't even mention Russell Westbrook. So these are a bunch of names on here. I mean, like I said, we all know Magic, Curry, Isaiah Thomas, Jason Kidd. No problem with that. 1 through 4, Stephen A. said, I'm with you, man. But number 5, Chris Paul. And like I said, his opinion is great. But you have to be able to explain that. I don't think you can explain him over John Stockton. I don't think you can explain him over Gary Payton. Like I said, it's a conversation with Steve Nash, Tony Parker. To me, these guys, like I said, the Penny, the Derrick Rose angle, those guys to me had greater potentials. So my problem with Stephen A. Smith in this video is that like I said, he blew the opportunity to educate the people, because you didn't want to talk about Bob Cousy. You didn't want to bring up Oscar Robertson, right? You didn't want to bring up Walt Clyde Frazier. You didn't want to bring up any of these guys that played the point guard position, and just to mention them and just say, listen, I don't want to talk about the Houdini, the hardwood Bob Cousy and everything he did, you know, the MVP that he won, the championships. I didn't want to bring up Oscar Robertson and his overall game, one of the great rebounders and scorers at that position. I didn't want to bring up Walt Clyde Frazier and the two-way play of Walt Clyde Frazier, a true champion. I didn't want, like, he didn't do any of that stuff. He just started doing this. Oh, my Magic Johnson. And Magic Johnson was there. Magic Johnson was in the building. I believe it was him, Magic Johnson, and Jay Williams. I'm so tired of Jay Williams. He actually called Jay Williams. He said that Jay Williams is in that conversation. I started laughing when he said that. Jay Williams not in that conversation. If Jay Williams didn't crash his motorcycle like an idiot, then yes, maybe he would have been in that conversation, because Jay Williams was a baller. But that's not what happened with Jay Williams. That's his fault. He's an idiot. And he sounds even dumber when he speaks, Jay Williams. But he had Magic Johnson there, and he was hyping up Magic, rightfully so. But then you go ahead and drop that list out in front of Magic Johnson? That's embarrassing, man. So once again, shout out to 2 Raw for dropping the video. I didn't see his video yet. You guys know the deal, man. I'll catch you guys on the next one.